What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the show. This weekend we are in Sedona, Arizona, shooting a little Cathedral rock here behind me. I'd actually had a different shot in mind from up the trail a little bit, but it has been super hot and super dry and there's no water up there, and I was hoping for a reflection shot of this, which doesn't look like it's going to happen. We've actually talked about just carrying buckets in here, but I don't think that's going to work, so we're trying to make the best of the evening by just shooting some cactus here in the foreground and then Cathedral rock in the background. Anyway, we're here, we're headed to the Sierras after this. Stick around, it might be a show. So obviously we aren't in the Sierras, these aren't trees, we're back at the house. Our retreat in Sedona was amazing, but we only got out for the one evening shoot that night. We got there when I filmed the intro. Our time in the Sierras was kind of great, but kind of a disaster. We found a few new places to go back and shoot, but they need fall colors, so we didn't do any photography in the Sierras, and there were so many people. And with this whole COVID thing, it just wasn't comfortable to really be there, to be out, even on the trails. We were finding that we really had to pick and choose carefully to be able to be anywhere where there just weren't a lot of people, and hiking with a mask is no fun. And so we ended up bailing after about 5 days and coming home, but we've got some great locations for the fall, so that's something to look forward to. Anyway, the picture that we took that first night in Sedona from the intro, posted it to social, and I got a few people asking about my editing workflow for doing that picture and a few specific questions. So I thought rather than just junk this episode altogether, we would do a little editing with Drew and jump into Photoshop and show you how I work through those files. So the one thing to know is that I noticed as I was shooting there, and this is something having that eyepiece is really helpful, is being able to review the photos. And because the cactus in this shot are so close to me, they were only about 3 or 4 feet. I was shooting with a 16 millimeter lens, wide open, I think. We'll check it in the files. 16 to 35, somewhere in that range. I wasn't able to get a really good crisp focus on my foreground and my background. This doesn't happen a lot, but sometimes the situation just calls for multiple shots with different focal lengths. Not focal lengths, different focal points. This is going to be a disaster, I can tell already. Just roll with it. So basically what I've got here is just 2 photographs. One that I focused on the foreground, on those cactus, and one that I'm focused on Cathedral rock in the background. So if we just jump into the computer here, I will walk you through my workflow for doing these pictures, and maybe you'll learn something, and maybe you'll just watch me make a bunch of mistakes, and maybe that'll be funny. So let's just jump into the computer and get going. So here we are in Adobe Bridge. I prefer Bridge and Photoshop over Lightroom. It's just a personal preference. Those of you who followed me for any amount of time know that. So as we jump into Adobe Camera Raw, you'll notice that if you're a Lightroom user, the tools are all there, but they're in a little bit different place. So don't let that throw you. Just enjoy watching me make a fool of myself here. Okay, so I'm going to open both of these files in Lightroom, in Adobe Camera Raw. And I'm just going to pick one to work through. Let's just zoom in here and I'll show you what I've got. So in this image, you can see that the cactus here is in beautiful focus, but if I scroll up to the mountains in the background, they're obviously soft. And so I've taken a second photograph where those are sharp. So we're just going to work with those 2, but I'm only going to work on one, and then we'll sync those settings afterwards. So a couple of things we want to address. First of all is that I can tell you right off the bat that this image was taken with a white balance that's too cool. This was evening. There was a lot of warmth in the sky, a lot of warmth in the light. So I'm just going to warm this up maybe to about 6,300 to start with, and we'll work from there. Next thing is, I know that because I didn't want to both bracket a shot and focus stack a shot, that I shot for somewhere in the middle on the exposure range where I wasn't blowing out my highlights, but where I was getting enough in the shadows that I would have something to work with. So the first thing we're going to do is just dump those highlights all the way down. That's not going to hurt us at all, and it's going to bring back a lot of that sky. Second thing that I want to do is I actually want to decrease the exposure just slightly on the whole thing. I want to bring the shadows up just a touch to start with, and then we're going to check and see where our whites are. Now I'm holding down the Option key on Mac, that's Alt on PC, as I'm using these sliders, and what you'll see is that I get this nice little banding, and I can tell where I'm just getting close to clipping and where I'm actually clipping. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a bump there. What I don't want to do is blow out some of these really bright highlights in the sky, because once those are gone, we're not going to be able to get them back. Well, I mean, except it's raw, so we can't get them back. Anyway. I'm going to leave those whites right about +10. I'm going to pull the blacks down just a little bit. And then just for right now, I'm just going to give us a little bit of vibrance and a little bit of saturation, just so we've got some color here to work with, because I want to be able to see where the problems are in the color and what I need to fix. And I can tell right now we're a little on the green side overall, so I'm just going to push towards the magenta just a touch. And then we're going to make some individual adjustments in the HSL sliders to really manipulate these colors a little more. So this is about where I'm going to leave it here. Now the next thing I want to do, I'm just going to throw on a linear gradient for that sky, just to bring the exposure of the sky down just a little bit. And I'm going to work through this rather quickly. If you have any questions on any of this stuff, please leave a comment, and I'll do more detailed tutorials on that. And I'm also just going to pull down the highlights just a little bit more in this adjustment. And you can see that it's darkening up some things in the mountain and foreground as that overlap happens. That's totally fine. We're going to come back and deal with that next. So now I'm going to jump into my radial adjustment. I'm actually going to drag a nice big radial adjustment right here in the middle. This is for all our foreground and for those mountains. Let's turn on the mask option so you can see what I'm talking about here. So I've got a medium feather on this, just enough that you're not going to see any hard edges on this adjustment, because all I really want to do is just bring this exposure up just a little bit. I'm going to push this maybe a half a stop just there in the foreground. So already you can see from before and after that we're getting someplace. I'll do that again, before and after. You can see we're getting something interesting coming out of here. So I'm just going to bump that exposure. I'm going to bring down the highlights just a little bit here. I'm going to pull the blacks down. That's not really doing much for us. And then I'm going to pull the whites just a little bit. So basically I'm just trying to create a little bit of contrast in that area. And then I'm going to throw one more of these on right around this cactus, because there we go. Because I want to affect just the cactus a little bit more. I'm just going to drag that out, and I'm going to bump the exposure of that just a little bit more, maybe another 15%, not a whole plus 15. There we go. All right. And a lot of times what I'm doing is I'm just experimenting. Sometimes you'll drag these sliders around, they won't make much of a difference, and sometimes one of them will make a big difference. It all depends on what you've kind of got going on underneath, what you're layering on top of, and what the overall effect is here. But I'm getting pretty close. I also want to go over to my optics here and just make the remove chromatic aberration and profile corrections so that that's done, because it's never fun to finish a file and then realize that you haven't done those corrections. All right, and then the last thing I want to do is jump into curves here, and I just want to drag down my shadows a little bit, just adding some contrast. I'm going to push those. I had this problem before. For some reason, my cursor disappears. I don't know why. All right, there we go. And then I'm just going to push this up just a little bit. There we go. Now we're getting closer to where we want to be. So you can see before and after. We've already made a great improvement on this file. Obviously, it's raw. Obviously, it's flat, and we need to make these adjustments. And the last thing I want to do is I want to go to the color mixer. And this is our hue, saturation, and luminance area, where we can really deal with these colors individually and tweak them to our heart's content one by one. So one thing that I do notice is that there's a lot of yellow in this green, and I think that I'd rather kind of push the yellows into the orange rather than in the green. I'm going to push the greens further towards the green. Oranges I'm going to leave where they are. Everything else I'm going to leave where it is. Then saturation, I'm going to push the blues up a little bit, not too far, because if I go too far, we're going to see really weird separation in the clouds, because it's not all blue up there. A lot of times people will just push that blue to make the sky all beautiful, and you don't really see the weird artifacting that happens when that blue comes in contact with other colors. So unless you're adjusting all the colors up there in the same way, you can end up with some really weird stuff, and we don't really want to do that. So I'm going to... You all right there, buddy? Hey, Coop. You okay? Dogs. He's got a cough. Anyway, so we're going to push the greens up a little bit. I actually want to pull the yellows down a touch, bring the saturation of the oranges up. And I don't want to pull the yellows too far, because I do have yellows in the sky, but I want to get yellows out of that green in the foreground. So that's kind of what I'm doing there. I'm going to push the magenta and purple just a little bit, just for some of this stuff back here around the rocks in the sky. All micro adjustments, really. I'm just kind of playing until my eye feels like it's right. And from there, I'm going to select both my files. I'm going to right click and just choose sync settings. I'm going to check all. If you don't choose check all on this sync settings and you've done things like radial or linear adjustments, they're not going to sync. So you've got to make sure that you click all. And then I'm going to open both of those as objects in Photoshop. All right, I've got both images open in Photoshop here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the first image and I'm just going to drag it over top of the second image. Then I'm going to close that first one. So now you can see, don't save. So now you can see I've got two different layers with two different images. And if I turn one on and one off, you'll actually see that there's a little bit of a shift. Obviously, when I was playing with the camera, changing the focus, I moved it a little bit. So the first thing we need to do is deal with that, and we'll do that by using align layers. But we can't align smart objects. So we've got to select both these layers, right click, and choose rasterize layers. That'll take them from a smart object that we could edit in a camera raw into just a standard image layer. And once that's done, we're going to go into image, edit, auto align layers. And we're just going to choose auto. We're not going to click anything else and just click OK. What this is going to do is try and align the pixels in those images to make sure that they line up correctly. And as you can see, we've got a little bit of white along the edges. If I turn one of these off, you can see down here at the bottom that things have shifted a little bit to make that all okay. We'll come back and do a crop afterwards, but I want to make sure that I've done my blending and that I know where my real edges are before we do that. So what we've got here, if I zoom in, is we have the mountain sharp image on top. So what I need to do is blend that layer with the layer below it so that we've got the right focus for the foreground and the right focus for the background. Now in the olden days, if you're not a CC user or if you've got an older version of Photoshop, this will need to be done manually. And this in this particular instance is super simple. And all we need to do is add a mask to this layer and then paint back in what we want to show. So what I'm going to do is hold down the Option key, that's Alt on PC, and click on the new layer mask icon. This will give me a blacked out mask on this layer, and then I can paint white on that mask in order to reveal the areas that I want to reveal. So I'm going to first actually just make a selection at the top of this and just fill it with white. That way I don't have to paint all of that in. And then I'm going to grab my white brush. I'm just going to paint lightly right around the tree line there, just staying away from my cactus because I don't want any of that. So this is what my mask looks like. It's just basic gradient here from my brush, fading one into the other. And if I zoom in nice and close, we can see that indeed our cactus is still showing as nice and crisp. And now our mountain is crisp as well. Now there's another way to focus stack that's built into Photoshop in the CCs that is really, really great. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I know for a fact because of the way that I shot this, that it's going to have trouble with this. And the reason is because that row of bushes behind the cactus there, I really should have done a three shot stack, and I should have done foreground, I should have done those bushes, and then I should have done the mountain because there is that mid distance. So what it will try and do is blend that far shot with the near shot, and it's just too much to handle, and I get some weird artifacting in the middle band there. So I know that's not going to work, so I'm not going to try it, but we will do a tutorial on that soon. In fact, maybe next. Maybe we'll do that next. Maybe we won't, but we probably will because I'm stuck at home. Anyway, so we've got our foreground and our background blended. Now let's just go ahead and open up the crop tool. Let's clear that out and let's just pull our crop in. And I think it's actually too wide anyway. So I'm just going to pull in past those branches there. Just isolate our foreground a little bit. I want a little more sky than that. Keep everything nice and in the center. And I like that, so I'm going to keep it. All right, next, I feel like in a lot of times, especially if you're showing images online or on Instagram, a lot of times an image like this that has so much detail doesn't really translate that well to those social media platforms because you're looking at it on a small phone, a small device, a small image. The image width of Instagram is 1080, which isn't that wide. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to add an Orton effect on top of this to actually make these colors and these blocks of things a little more robust. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Shift, Option, Command, and click the E key. That will make a new merged copy. So take everything from below. It's basically apply image. It copies everything from what's below and puts it all on a new layer, all merged together. So then we can work with that. So then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And I'm just going to blur it about 20 pixels. For this particular resolution, I know that's going to work. And if you're looking at the image Once the details start to blur out and you start to get that nice fuzziness, that's far enough to stop. So I'm going to click OK. And then I'm going to Command L to bring up my levels dialog. And this is an adjustment layer. This is actually doing levels to that blurred out layer. I'm just going to pull in the blacks and the whites. This will give us a little more contrast in our Orton, and it just makes the whole thing a little bit punchier. Then the last thing I'm going to do is just pull that opacity down to somewhere between 15 and 20%. It's probably going to feel good for this. We'll go to 20 so you guys can see the difference there. So I'm going to just show you 100% here. And then I'm just going to turn that on and off. So here's before, here's after. Before and after. Now we're not actually losing any detail. All the detail is still there. This is just creating a nice little glow, and it's actually adding a little bit more richness to our colors, to our shadows, and it can give a nice feel, especially for the social medias and that sort of thing. All right, now the last thing that I can see that I want to add to this is a little bit of a vignette. So I'm going to go ahead and use the same keyboard shortcut as before to apply the image on a new layer. So Shift, Option, Command, and E. And we're just going to call this one, what do you think? Vignette. All right, does that vignette have two E's, two T's, can I spell? This is horrible, I'm sorry. Vignette, however it's spelled. And then for this version, I'm actually going to go with multiply. I'm going to pull the fill down to about there. And then I'm going to add a mask to that, grab a big brush. I'm actually going to just paint out where I want this to go. So I'm just going to paint right with black, right in the middle there. And you can see what I'm doing. I'm basically just pulling out where I want the vignette, and I actually don't want it to show on the sides either. So I'm going to shrink that brush down, and I'm just going to pull it right through the middle there. So this is basically what I'm excluding from my vignette, and everything else will get the vignette. So here, if I turn that on and off, and the reason I'm using the multiply with the applied layer is because I feel like a lot of times if you just try and do an effect, you add a layer with black or with a gradient, you don't get quite the same effect, and you can lose a little bit of color sometimes. Maybe that's just me, maybe that's just my eye, but that's how I've always felt. And so I like to do it this way, where then I can compound those colors on top of one another, and sometimes even different blend modes in that multiply space will have different effects. So that's fun to try out. Now I'm actually going to do a little bit more. I thought I would stop, but I'm just not ready to stop. So I'm going to apply that image again. I'm going to convert that to a smart object so that I can go back to Adobe Camera Raw and make this a non-destructive edit at this point. Then I'm going to open Camera Raw by choosing Shift, Command, and A, and that will open this back up. And I actually want to do one more radial right in here to brighten that up, because I just don't think it's popping enough. So right about there, I'm going to go back, and I'm also going to go into my basic panel, and I'm just going to push the vibrance just a little bit more. So there's before and after. That might even be a little bit extreme. Let's just tone that down just a little bit. Maybe just a quarter stop, just a little bit of punch there in the middle. Then I'm going to click OK. And that's basically how I edited this image. I'll throw up my actual final, not rushed through version here for you to see, but these are basically the steps that got me there. I hope you learned something. I hope I didn't rush too fast, or, I rushed. I know I rushed. Hopefully got something out of it. If not, stick around for the next one. Maybe it'll be better. The next one will be better, I'm sure, probably.